So next we're going to cover Chapter 10, the senses. So for the most part, senses are actually classified into general sense organs. And these are individual cells or receptor units that are widely distributed throughout the body. These are different from your special sense organs, which are the ones that we normally think of, like your vision or your sense of smell or taste, which are groupings of receptors that are kind of make their own highly complex organ and are very specific to the certain functions that they do. Normally, different sense organs are classified by the stimuli required to activate them. Now, we don't expect you guys to know this list by the specific names that they are, but I just want you to kind of know that these are the things that your sense organs are going to perceive. Things like lightness or chemicals, injury such as pain, temperature changes, or movement, or your position in relationship to space. So all sense organs have some common functional characteristics. They're all able to detect their particular stimulus, so that means that each one has its own stimulus that it detects, but if it's a specific pain receptor, it'll always sense pain. If it's a smell receptor, it'll always sense smell. The stimulus is converted then to a nerve impulse. So whatever your pain sense is then stimulated to a nerve impulse so that it can go down your axon. Remember that from covering your nervous system, so that it can be perceived by your brain as a sensation, and then your brain, your central nervous system, can tell your body what to do about it. So, like we said, those general sense organs are widely distributed single-cell receptors among the body. Your skin is a very common place for these. Your skin has a lot of receptors in it, and that's to help us sense the outside world. Things like pain, or to discriminate soft touch from heavy touch or pressure, and temperature, vibration, temperature. Your skin has all kinds of receptors in it. As you can see here, you can see where there are all these different receptors in it, and they're all pretty close together, and that's because each receptor is going to tell you something different in that one particular area. So one of these receptors is going to, like your tactile one here, will sense touch, but it's not going to sense pain or temperature or anything like that. So that's why you need all the other ones that'll do their own thing as well. So another type of receptors, you have muscle receptors. And that's because your muscles have these receptors to tell them where they are in relationship to kind of the rest of your body or to self. And that's because if we didn't have these receptors, if you had your hand in the air, your muscle wouldn't know that that's where it was. So that receptor kind of uses the type of stretch to tell where it is in space. And then you have deep receptors. These receptors are going to tell stretch or pressure receptors that happen in your hollow organs, things like, your stomach or your bladder. They're going to tell you that they're full because of that stretch feeling that they get. And then you also have some chemical receptors. These are other deep receptors. They're located very deep in the body. And those are able to detect things like changes in pH or carbon dioxide. So that's really important because an alteration in pH is going to alter your body's homeostasis, so that ability to maintain its normal constant environment. And so having those receptors tells your body, oh, our pH is starting to get too low. We're becoming acidic. We need to do something about it. Or carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, remember that we breathe that off with our respirations. So if we have too much carbon dioxide, we know we have to start breathing a little bit more because we have to start breathing that off. So now moving on to some special sense organs. First, we'll cover the eye. Eye is pretty complex. Now, I don't expect you to know a ton of the details about the anatomy of the eye, just the basics here. So, for layers of the eye, first there's the sclera. The sclera is that very tough outer coating. It's known as the white of the eye. And then there's a transparent cornea, which is the part of the sclera that lies in the center over the iris. Your choroid is the pigmented vascular layer, and that prevents the scattering of light as it goes through your eye. So the frontal part is made out of that ciliary muscle, and your iris, and that's what allows your pupil, which is located in the center of your iris, to constrict and dilate. And that's just to alter the amount of light that comes into your eye so that you get an adequate amount of light to provide good vision. So that you can see the picture of the eye. It's your sclera here, it's your white part, your iris, the color, and the pupil there in the middle. And so remember, this is a muscle, right, located in here, so it can dilate or constrict to alter how large your pupil is and how much light is allowed in. So you have some layers of your eye. The retina is that innermost layer, and that's what contains the receptors to sense day vision and night vision. So that's why the retina is pretty important. And then you have your conjunctiva, and that's your mucous membrane. So remember, though, your mucous membranes are ones that are exposed to the external environment, and they secrete a really good thick mucus, or like a thick lubrication, and that's to help protect those membranes from the outside world. So here's a mucous membrane, and it covers the front surface of the sclera and the lining of the eyelid. So those are the parts of your eye that are exposed to the outside world, correct? And then finally you have your lens. Your lens is the transparent body which is behind the pupil, and that's where the light rays are focused on the retina. So for some visual disorders, first we can have some refraction disorders. These things are pretty common. You can have myopia. Myopia is nearsightedness, and that's caused by an elongation of the eyeball. Or you can have hyperopia. Hyperopia causes farsightedness, and that's caused by a shortening of the eyeball. So I know it's a little hard to think of elongating or shortening, but your eye, which is normally just that totally round sphere, can actually alter a little bit in shape and become more oval-like. So if it becomes shorter, kind of from back to front, that causes hyperopia. If it becomes shorter, like top to bottom, so that it's more that oval is on its side, heading from front to back, that's what causes nearsightedness. And that's just because it alters where the light hits in your eye. And finally, we have astigmatism, which is a distortion that's caused by an irregularity of the cornea or of the lens. So here you can see a picture. So this is a regular eye. Notice how it's nice and round, and that light hits in a good spot right there. So myopia, this is nearsightedness. See how it hits a little early? Or hyperopia, hits a little late. And because of that alteration in where it hits in your eye, it's going to alter how clear your vision is. And that's why we have glasses, because it's going to correct where it hits in your eye. So for more visual disturbances, we have conjunctivitis. So conjunctivitis is an inflammation of the conjunctiva. So this can interfere with refraction, or how that light is perceived and interpreted in your eye. So you can have an acute bacterial conjunctivitis, and this is a very contagious form of the infection, and it produces this mucousy, pussy discharge, and that carries that bacteria in it, so it's really easily spread. Or you can have a conjunctivitis that's just the swelling, and it's not caused by a bacteria, and that's normally related to allergies. You can also have strabismus. Strabismus is an improper alignment of the eye. And that means that like one eye is straight and facing forward, and the other one kind of drifts inward. The problem with this is that if it's not corrected, it can actually cause blindness. So there you can see conjunctivitis, that white pus located there. So we know just by looking at this picture that this is a bacterial conjunctivitis. And here we see an example of strabismus. So notice how this eye is nice and centered, and this eye should be out here a little bit. Instead, it's to the inside. So that's strabismus. So for other visual disturbances, for some more disorders of the retina, you can actually have retinal detachment. And that can be a complication just that comes with aging, or can also be caused by tumors of the eye area, or of a head trauma can actually cause your retina to detach from the rest of your eye. Another thing that we can see is diabetic retinopathy. So that's a really big one for people who suffer from diabetes, which we'll cover in a little bit more detail as we go. And what that does is that it damages the retina. from these little hemorrhages and growth abnormalities of vessels that happen to accompany diabetes, and it actually causes enough damage to the retina that it's not going to be able to interpret data correctly anymore. And then there is glaucoma. Glaucoma is when you have an intraocular pressure that is so high that it actually increases the blood flow in your retina, which actually causes retinal degeneration because you're sort of slowly starving that tissue by not letting it have the food it needs to survive. And then you can have nisotolopia, and that's night blindness, or the inability to see in dim light, and that's normally caused by a retinal degeneration or by the lack of vitamin A. So then you can also have macular degeneration. Macular degeneration is a progressive degenerative or degeneration of the central part of the retina. And that's normally the leading cause of permanent blindness in the elderly. So that's definitely one that you will see again. And then another fairly common one is the red-green blindness. Now this is an X-linked disorder. If you remember correctly from us mentioning this in earlier chapters, X-linked is also means sex-linked. It normally happens in the male gender. And this is a genetic complication that basically involves the inability to perceive certain colors. In this sense, it changes their ability to perceive red versus green. So if you just look at something, they tend to look the same. So then you can have, for some other visual disturbances, just degeneration of your optic nerve. Now that can result from diabetes for the same reasons that you can have retinal degeneration. Can also be glaucoma, because remember how glaucoma created enough intraocular pressure that it minimized the blood flow to your ocular nerve, or to your retina. It can also do it to your ocular nerve. Or there are a couple other reasons that are sort of along the same lines. So you can have a scotoma, and that's when you have the loss of your central vision field. And only certain nerve pathways are damaged, and those are the ones where it allows you to see kind of right in the middle. So that's damaged. And then a CVA, which hopefully you remember us talking about in the neuro chapter. During a CVA or a cerebrovascular accident, you can actually damage your vision if that happens to be part of the brain that's going to now have decreased blood flow to it. So you can damage your vision and eyes that way as well. So here are some pictures. Now these are used for the red-green blindness test. You can see there's some red here on the outside and green in the middle. This is the outside is a very, very dark green. The inside is kind of a reddishy pink color here. So here 74 and here is 42. So these are just an example of some of the cards that they're going to use to try and decide if someone has color blindness. So moving away from the eye, let's quickly cover the ear. So the ear is made up of, or is a sense organ that is used for hearing and for equilibrium and balance. So the physical forces that create sound actually create these vibrations. And what happens is that your ear is composed of a whole bunch of teeny tiny little bones, and there's some fluid located inside there. And as what you're hearing moves those things, your body kind of carries the message, or interprets that movement and into a nerve impulse and hears it as a sound. That's how you interpret it. And it's just by that vibration that it feels. So here's a picture of someone getting an ear exam. So you can see there's your external ear here. It's an otoscope, which is what somebody's using to look inside somebody's ear, and that's a nice healthy tympanic membrane. So you can have some conduction impairments that cause hearing disorders. Now those can actually be caused by a blockage, which can be on the external or in the middle ear. And that could be something like a tumor or even just a physical element that happens to be in there. Somebody gets something stuck in their ear, it's a physical blockage. You can have otosclerosis, and that's an inherited bone disorder, which actually involves an irregularity in the shapes of those little bones in your ear. Remember how I said that you have those little tiny bones in your ear, and it's actually how they interact with each other that causes the vibration that we then interpret as sound. Well, if they're irregular, they're not going to be able to move correctly and create the correct vibrations. So this normally appears as tinnitus or ringing, and then it progresses to a hear loss. Another common complication is otitis. Otitis is ear inflammation, and this is normally caused by an infection. And that actually produces so much swelling and sort of thick pustulous fluids that it actually blocks the sound conduction. So this is a picture of otitis. You can see here how this is bulging and very red and inflamed, and it doesn't have that nice clear dark appearance that our previous healthy tympanic membrane did. So this is definitely an infected tympanic membrane. So for other types of hearing disorders that are caused by nerve impairment, we have presbycusis, which is a progressive nerve deafness, and that's just associated with just aging over time. And besides just aging over time that kind of causes that progressive nerve deafness, also being chronically exposed to loud sounds can do the same thing. And that's because that chronically being exposed to loud sounds, because remember how your inner ear is really just made up of a whole bunch of small bones. It's kind of like a joint. So if they used constantly and don't really get a good rest because of those loud sounds that they're exposed to, it's kind of like doing an extreme sport. Eventually they're just going to really wear out, and where they articulate with each other is going to really deteriorate over time, and it can actually decrease your ability to hear over time. And then another disorder that someone can have is Meniere's disease. And Meniere's disease is just a chronic inner ear disorder that's characterized by tinnitus. Remember, tinnitus is ringing in the ear, along with nerve deafness, and then vertigo, because you remember how your ear actually has to do with balance. So if there's a problem with your ear, it can actually affect your balance and your sense of vertigo, which is kind of your sense of up and down. So next we're just going to cover the taste receptors. So these are a type of chemoreceptors, and they're normally referred to as your taste buds. You have 4 different kinds, which you've probably heard of before, and these are your sense organs that sense things like sweet, sour, bitter, and salty. Another really important thing to know is that your gustatory and your olfactory senses really work together. So that means that your sense of taste and your sense of smell work a lot together. If you can't smell anything, it's going to seem like your taste is really diminished as well. And that's because your gustatory receptors just don't have that olfactory receptors to kind of back it up and reinforce it. So here's a picture where you can see somebody's tongue and kind of a close-up of those taste buds. So now your sense of smell, since we talked about how your sense of taste really involves it. So your olfactory receptors, they're extremely sensitive, and that's how they can be so influential with what we eat. But because they are so extremely sensitive, they're also fatigued very, very easily. So if I walk into a room where someone's just baked something, it's going to smell super strong. But after I've been there for a few minutes, it seems like the smell's totally gone away. And that's not because my olfactory nerves are less sensitive or that the smell is less appealing to me. It's just that my olfactory receptors are really fatigued and they're tired, so they're just not smelling it anymore. Now, if I went outside, rested for 5 minutes, came back inside, I would smell it all over again. And so the other thing is just that those odor-causing chemicals, they initiate a nerve signal so that the brain can interpret it, just like the rest of our nerve centers. Because the brain still has to interpret that smell, what it smells, what it means, what it is, that kind of stuff. So here is a picture just to help you see. So I'm here, I have a gumdrop, and I'm getting ready to eat it. So not only am I getting the sense of taste here, but as I'm bringing it to my mouth, I'm smelling it, and while it's in my mouth, because the back of my mouth actually opens up into my nasal cavity as well, a little bit of that smell is going up and really affecting my olfactory nerve here, which is why my sense of taste is so affected by what I smell as well. And that brings us to the end of this nice, short, and sweet lecture on the senses.